The story began beneath a moonlit sky, where a man stood, declaring that the time had come. His clan, once proud and strong, had been wiped out by the demonic sect. Yet, their struggle to survive had not been for mere survival, but solely for revenge. With a resolute gaze, he stood atop a high tree branch, his eyes fixed ahead. Without hesitation, he leaped over a wall, landing with ease near a fire burning in the bowl torch. A guard stood vigilantly nearby, unaware of the creeping danger. As shadows began to move, hands began to emerge from the darkness, and in a ruthless finality, he snapped the guard's neck. He muttered to himself that it wouldn't take long before the sentry's disappearance was noticed, but by then, his task would be complete. The bloodshed continued in the distance, and with it, the air grew thick with tension. Elsewhere, an old man, deep in meditation, heard the noise from outside and remarked that it was unusually loud. His eyes opened, revealing a deep and unnerving red. Kang Woon-cheon went in as he observed the old man's calm demeanor with disdain. He couldn't believe the heavenly demon remained unmoved, meditating while his subordinates were slaughtered. To him, the old man was heartless, but the demon's words were calm as he replied. He noted that the same could be said of his opponent. He questioned whether a man, while ascending a mountain, would concern himself with the insects beneath his feet. Of course not, the old man explained, for his gaze would be fixed on the peak. It was the mindset required to reach the pinnacle of martial arts. Woon-cheon scoffed at the old man's words, dismissing them as nonsense. He made it clear that today, he would take the old man's life with his own hands. The old man, the heavenly demon, was unfazed. As Woon-cheon moved forward, a blue aura began to emanate from his hand. He prepared the heavenly lightning fist, a technique that charged up powerful lightning within his palm. With swift precision, he launched his attack directly at the heavenly demon's face. However, the heavenly demon raised his hand in response, stretching it out in a fluid motion. He laughed, taunting Woon-cheon, asking if that was truly all he had. The demon unleashed his own martial art, the heavenly blood-tide art. From his hand, an energy beam shot forward, meeting Woon-cheon's lightning fist in a tremendous clash. The battle between the two martial arts created a force akin to the intense energy battles seen in legendary stories of old. Despite Woon-cheon's overwhelming power, the heavenly demon's energy surged past him, striking him in the face. He felt the burn of the attack and immediately recognized the energy beam for what it was, a sword energy. With an air of arrogance, the old man claimed that Woon-cheon would join his father today, signaling the end of the battle. Yet, Woon-cheon was not finished. With determination, he began to perform another technique, surprising the heavenly demon. This time, with a swift motion, Woon-cheon unleashed the heavenly divine palm. The powerful strike shattered the energy beam, and Woon-cheon continued his assault, landing a decisive punch directly on the demon's chest. Lightning surged throughout the demon's body, sending him flying into the wall behind him. Panting, Woon-cheon spoke harshly, warning the old man to stop speaking of his father in such a disrespectful manner. He reminded him of the countless lives the old man had destroyed, the evil deeds he had committed, and how this moment of vengeance was not just his own. It was the collective rage of all those the old man had wronged. The heavenly demon, now stunned, retorted that he should have wiped out the Cloud Dragon sect long ago. He was genuinely surprised by Woon-cheon's strength, unable to comprehend how the young man had managed to break through his heavenly demon blood surge art. The demon now realized that he had no other choice. With great effort, the heavenly demon pulled out a gourd, which Woon-cheon quickly recognized. When he asked if it was an elixir, the old man began drinking its contents without hesitation. Woon-cheon warned the old man that consuming such a potent elixir in one go would cause his demonic ki to deviate. A powerful purple energy burst forth as the gourd shattered, the demon's energy overflowing beyond control. His face contorted in agony as his eyes bulged, and with a terrifying roar, he released a shockwave of power. The force of it sent wind rushing outward, forcing Woon Seowoon to raise his hands to protect himself from the fierce blast. The battle had reached its climax, and it was clear that neither opponent would yield easily. The outcome of their clash was now inevitable. The battle between Woon Seowoon and the heavenly demon raged on, and Woon Seowoon couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Just as he turned to respond to the heavenly demon's voice, he realized too late that the attack was already incoming. The heavenly demon, looming behind him, declared that it was time for Woon Seowoon to disappear. As the attack drew closer, Woon Seowoon recognized his helplessness, but suddenly a voice intervened. A barrier materialized just in time, wrapping around Woon Seowoon and protecting him from the oncoming assault. Woon Seowoon's eyes widened as he recognized the protective shield. His surprise was palpable, but before he could react, a man stepped forward, apologizing for his late arrival. He explained that he had gotten caught lazing around. Woon Seowoon called him the Great Mage, but the man immediately dismissed the title, insisting that he had told Woon Seowoon not to call him something so trivial. The mage then turned his gaze toward the heavenly demon, asking if this was the nemesis Woon Seowoon had spoken of. Woon Seowoon responded that indeed, this was the man who claimed to have come from another world, and without him, Woon Seowoon would have already perished. Suddenly, the scene shifted, and the narrative took a jarring turn to reality. A man, Jin Seawoon, could be heard shouting in frustration. He had been reading a Murim-themed novel, enjoying the story until the unexpected appearance of a high-level mage from another world shattered his immersion. Seawoon couldn't help but complain about the sudden plot twist. He wondered aloud why a random mage from another world had appeared out of nowhere. His irritation grew as he sighed, lamenting that he had been enjoying the story until that moment. The appearance of this new element seemed like a mood killer. Seawoon expressed disbelief, questioning how it made sense for an entire world to just appear out of nowhere. His thoughts were clear. The author must have been on something, he mused, to come up with such an implausible plot. His phone buzzed with a notification, and he glanced down, recognizing that his friend had messaged him. Seawoon had been discharged from the military 6 months ago and was preparing to return to college. His friend, eager for a gaming session, invited him to grind ranked matches, and Seawoon couldn't help but wonder why his friend had no one else to play with. Reflecting on his life after the military, Seawoon explained that, like many who had completed their service, he had carefully crafted a plan. He intended to earn certifications and study all the things he had missed while serving. However, he felt disconnected from society, as he had missed out on many of the experiences others had enjoyed. As Seawoon headed into town, he thought about his remaining funds, briefly considering finding a part-time job. Being an avid fan of Murim novels, he often fantasized about living as the protagonist in such a world. He made his way into a PC cafe, where the cashier greeted him by name, asking if he was going to play Loyal Ground again that day. Seawoon confirmed it and ordered 10 hours of playtime. Loyal Ground was the only game he had played during his military leave, and he had spent countless hours grinding it. Within 3 months, he had risen to a top 10 rank, his dedication paying off. He logged into the game and messaged his friend to wait for him in the lobby. Seawoon had even earned some extra cash from tournament prizes at internet cafes. Loyal Ground, a Battle Royale game, was a straightforward game. 100 players dropped from a plane, collected weapons scattered around the map, and fought until only one remained standing. Now in the game, Seawoon began communicating with his friend, directing him to the coordinates where 2 other players were located. He instructed his friend to look towards 120 on the compass, which was displayed at the top of the screen. Seawoon aimed and quickly killed both opponents with 2 precise headshots. His friend shouted in excitement, noting that only 2 players remained. Seawoon chastised his friend for being so loud, recalling that his friend had already been eliminated once. He advised his friend to focus on looting and staying alive, emphasizing the need to find the safe zone before it closed. As the circle shrank, some other players running towards a building. They cautiously entered the building, spotting a first aid kit on the ground. One of them remarked that the presence of loot suggested that the other player hadn't entered yet. But Seowoon was hiding beneath the shadow. The players did not notice someone had hid there. As one player enters the building, aiming to grab some free loot, they discover Seowoon's character sitting in the corner, camping the loot. The player outside hears gunshots and receives notification that his teammate is dead. In disbelief, he mutters that he can't believe the teammate was hiding inside. With no time to trade out his teammate, he begins running away, but before he can get far, a bullet hits him in the back of the head. Now, he's the last one left, earning the coveted chicken dinner. Seowoon's friend, grateful for the win, thanks him for carrying the game. Seowoon, however, simply tells him to queue up for the next match and reminds him that he needs to lock in and start studying tomorrow. As Seowoon's phone buzzes, he looks down at it, and his mother's message appears. She asks if he's studying well and mentions that she sent his academy fees along with some extra money, hoping he eats well. She apologizes for not being able to send more. Seowoon thanks her, acknowledging that it's his mother's love and support. He responds, telling her that he's going to bed soon. Seowoon then tells his friend that he won't be playing anymore starting tomorrow. His friend protests, reminding him that they had planned to participate in a clan war together. However, Seowoon tells him that he can't go because he needs to start attending an English academy. He feels guilty every time he reads his mother's messages, as he's been living in this cycle for months. As he heads back to his apartment, he begins to doom scroll on his phone that night. Among the various videos, he stumbles upon one talking about people with mysterious powers being spotted overseas. These people are calling themselves players. Intrigued, Seowoon clicks the video, but it suddenly disappears. The video got deleted. He finds the situation strange, but decides to sleep it off. The next morning, as he heads out to the academy, his friend calls him, reminding him that they still need to prepare for the clan war. Seowoon tells him that he wants to help in one last game, but before he can finish his sentence, a purple light begins to glow behind him. He turns around, completely taken aback, and wonders what's going on. The light continues to draw closer, engulfing him entirely. His backpack falls to the ground, and not a trace of him is left behind. Now enveloped in the light, Seowoon wonders what it was and whether it's some sort of punishment for waiting too long to make his decision. As Seowoon slowly opens his eyes, he hears people speaking foreign language, and he's immediately startled by the volume. Looking ahead, he sees people fighting with swords and casting magic. They wield all kind of weapons and all kind of different outfits. Completely confused, Seowoon wonders if he's dreaming. He takes in more of the scene around him, spotting a statue nearby. The statue suddenly comes to life, announcing that 100 players have been detected. Still disoriented, Seowoon wonders why he hears a voice in his head and feels that the situation is a bit loud. The statue's eyes glow as it declares that the system is initializing. Seowoon's eyes also begin to glow with a blue hue, still trying to process what's happening. The statue then mentions that the language is being synchronized, and suddenly, the foreign language Seowoon had been hearing earlier is now being translated directly into Korean. In front of him, a large man comments that everyone is now speaking his language. Among the chaos, some characters from the Murim world discuss matters, including two mages. A mage named Chiron asked another named Escrow what he did to get them into this situation. Escrow responds, claiming he wanted to ask Chiron the same question, wondering why he had brought him here. Irritated, Chiron retorts that he won't be fooled by Escrow's words anymore. Unfazed, Escrow states that it no longer matters whether Chiron believes him, because everyone is fated to kneel before the Demon King's power. As the Archmage, Chiron declared that he would make a promise to Escrow as he summoned lightning in his hand. With a fierce look, he vowed to kill Escrow here and then swiftly end the Demon King's reign. He unleashed his ability, the Karen-style lightning, zapping Escrow where he stood. However, to Karen's surprise and confusion, Escrow stood completely unharmed, unaffected by the powerful strike. Karen's suspicion grew as he realized that he must have been the one who brought Chiron to this place. Meanwhile, witnessing the unfolding scene, Seowoon began to feel a creeping sense of disbelief. It was becoming too realistic to be a mere dream. Still looming in the background, the statue spoke again, announcing that the game was about to begin. The difficulty was set to easy, and the objective was explained. They only needed to reach the top 90. The designated map for this game was the kingdom's capital, and the rewards would go to the top 10 players and higher. The statue further explained that the tutorial would be skipped, and in the waiting room, players couldn't attack one another as everything was neutralized. A map materialized before Seowoon as the statue continued. For those accessing the Cloyd Survival game for the first time, it provided a brief explanation. The game would last for 100 years, and each day, the map would become more limited. Exiting the boundaries of the map would result in severe consequences, so players were advised to proceed cautiously. The ultimate goal was to be the last survivor, with the game concluding when only one player remained. If the game ended or a player was eliminated, they would return to their original world. Additionally, players who failed to make it into the top 90 would never be able to partake in Cloyd Survival again. The statue then declared that the players would soon descend to their chosen location with the help of her Gus gaze, allowing them to collect items and use them to reach the top 90. The statue wished them good luck. Still processing everything, Seowoon wondered if he was dreaming about Loyal Ground, the game he had been so engrossed in. His anxiety grew as the status window reaffirmed the rewards for the top 10 and higher. Despite the possibility of this being a dream, Seowoon found himself surrounded by people who seemed all too real, crazy humans who made him nervous. One particularly unsettling figure was licking his knife, a behavior Seowoon found disturbingly strange. He quickly realized that, regardless of whether this was a dream or not, he was in grave danger. Fearful for his life, Seowoon muttered that he didn't want to die, even if this was just a dream. Before he could finish his thought, someone called out to him, addressing him as Messy Hair. The man demanded to know why Seowoon kept looking around and asked where he was from. When Seowoon didn't answer, the man swung his blade toward him. He was offended after being ignored by a skinny man. Just then, the countdown for the game began, and Seowoon smiled, asking why Seowoon was smiling in such a tense situation. He called Seowoon crazy, but Seowoon just grinned back, explaining that there was a simple reason for his smile. He was dreaming such a fun dream. Why wouldn't he enjoy it? With his knowledge of the game, which he referred to as log, Seowoon was confident that he could defeat people like this and survive. The countdown hit its final second, and day 1 of Cloyd Survival began. Players were soon dropping from a high altitude, so toward the massive region of the kingdom's capital. They were covered in a protective barrier, descending toward the battlefield. Analyzing the situation, Seowoon realized they were descending into crowded areas, places abundant with items. However, he decided that starting on the outskirts would be safer. He spotted a house in the distance and quickly shouted, "Descend," before diving straight down toward the ground. In a moment of panic, he screamed and even struck a superhero pose as he plummeted. However, despite the dramatic descent, he was unharmed. After landing, Seowoon paused for a moment, feeling dizzy from the intense motion. He was overcome with motion sickness and struggled to hold back the urge to vomit. His focus shifted to the house ahead. Determined to get inside, he heard rustling in the bushes nearby, which caught him off guard. He bolted toward the house, realizing he hadn't been able to see who had landed with him due to his dizziness. He pushed through the door, finally making it into the house and securing his temporary refuge. Seowoon realized that if he encountered an enemy without a weapon, he would be done for. He quickly closed the door behind him, his chest heaving as he began to pant. He wondered if it was the sword-wielding man from earlier, regretting having provoked him. Looking out the window and seeing no one, Seowoon breathed a sigh of relief, deciding it must have been the wind. Fortunately, he didn't hear anything else, and he was able to calm down and continue moving on. He wanted to begin searching the house. He remembered that items were obtained where players landed, so he needed to look for them here. As he moved forward, Seowoon noticed something beneath him. Looking down, the system notified him that he had obtained a heavy crossbow. It was heavy, but better than nothing. He reached for the quiver, pulled out an arrow, and equipped it. As soon as he did, the method of use naturally came to him. He began reloading the crossbow. As a South Korean Army sergeant, This was nothing for him. Seowoon did exactly that. The shot was incredibly powerful, piercing halfway through the wall and sending him flying backward. He was surprised at how effective it was, as it had penetrated deeply into the wood. If he learned to use it properly, it could be a useful weapon. After looking around more, but finding nothing else, he decided to move on. The map was vast, and he knew if he didn't run into enemies at the start, he could safely farm the area. He raised the crossbow and carefully cleared the house in front of him. On a table, he spotted a scroll and moved over to examine it. It was labeled a healing scroll. The scroll was small, and the system explained that if he ripped it, his injuries would heal. Seowoon could hardly believe such an item existed. He wished he had an item bag to carry more recovery items. Then his eyes fell on a glowing purple book on a shelf nearby. He picked it up, and the system informed him that he had obtained the Black Star Energy Palm's martial arts book. This martial art allowed him to project dark energy through his fingers. The system asked if he wanted to learn it. Seowoon immediately accepts the prompt to use it, wondering if it would trigger a tutorial. Right after, the book began to glow vibrantly, and the pages turned before his eyes. As he watched, the book slowly began to disintegrate. Confused, Seowoon looked down at his hands, wondering if that was it. As he stared at his palm, he felt an energy swelling up, growing stronger with every passing second. Curious to test it, Seowoon grabbed a fork from the table and imbued it with energy. He hurled the fork into the nearby wall with all his strength, and it stabbed deep into the wall. He smiled, pleased to have learned a martial art just from reading a book. Seowoon walked over, pulled the fork out of the wall, and murmured that this would be incredibly useful. The existence of martial arts books meant that there were probably magic books as well. Regardless, Seowoon was now certain that Cloyd Survival and Loyal Ground were the same game. After searching the area thoroughly, Seowoon decided to move on. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Seowoon realized he had been farming for some time. He needed to find a place to hide quickly. He looked around and saw a house with its lights on. He figured that the light either meant there was a rare item inside or someone was already there. Seowoon entered carefully, trying not to make a sound. He wasn't sure how many people had landed near him, but if someone was inside, they could either be a complete pro or a complete noob. He listened intently, but he didn't hear anything. He moved cautiously through the house, checking each room before proceeding. Seowoon wondered if the enemies were hiding on the second floor. He felt a growing sense of anxiety, unsure of what he might find. He knew that if he had his weapon and used his Black Star Energy Palms technique, even if they were professionals, he might stand a chance. Slowly, he ascended the steps, doing his best to make no noise. His crossbow was gripped firmly in his hands as he took each step cautiously. Then, just ahead of him, he spotted something, a lantern. His instincts kicked in, and he wondered if it was a trap, especially with a room right beside it. After a brief moment of doubt, Seowoon decided to act. He kicked the door wide open, revealing the bedroom beyond. He looked around the room, letting out a quiet sigh of relief as no one was there. He found a ring on the drawer and picked it up, wondering if it might be an item. The ring was labeled Ring of Strength, which promised an increase of 20 in strength when equipped. Seowoon wondered if it would truly make him stronger just by wearing it. He slid it onto his index finger, immediately feeling a strange sensation. His body felt lighter, almost as if the weight of the crossbow had significantly decreased, even though it had been heavy before. The ring had increased his strength by 20, and he figured he should check his stats. He tried cycling through a few commands, finally managing to pull up his character info. The stats revealed that he was still quite weak. He wondered if his classification as a martial artist was simply because he had learned a martial art. Still, compared to when he had started with nothing, he felt like he had made progress. This was a good sign, and he was glad to have made it this far. Deciding to continue exploring the first floor, Seowoon found a subspace ring, the very item he had been hoping for earlier. He couldn't help but smile as he thought how convenient it was to find yet another ring. He quickly checked the status window, which explained how the subspace ring worked. To store an item, Seowoon had to grab it and either say or think of the word subspace. After that, He could touch the ring with his other hand, and the item would be stored inside. The status window also mentioned that if the subspace became full, he wouldn't be able to store any more items. Seowoon grinned, impressed by the simplicity of the system. It was essentially an inventory system like in the games he used to play. He began to open the subspace in front of him, feeling an odd but intriguing sensation. He decided to store the healing scroll inside, thrilled by the convenience of no longer needing to carry it around in a bag. This system was incredibly efficient, and Seowoon couldn't help but think how much more convenient life would be with something like this in reality. His thoughts wandered to what it would be like to bring back the martial arts and items into the real world. If he could do that, it would be an even bigger game changer than he had anticipated. As he continued to think, Seowoon wondered how many players had been eliminated so far. Looking at the interface, he figured there must be a kill log. He found it and discovered that only one person had been eliminated up to that point. He had initially planned to farm until only 90 players were left, but he had already searched several houses and found a lot of consumable items. His luck had been on his side, and he had even found a number of hidden weapons, which complemented his Black Star Energy Palm's martial arts. While he had gathered a lot, Seowoon knew it was time to move on. Staying in one place for too long wasn't a good idea, especially with the powerful players he had seen in the waiting room. With his current level, he wasn't strong enough to face them. However, if he managed to stay hidden and make it into the top 10, he would have the opportunity to allocate points where they were needed most. Seowoon considered the risk, but he knew that there would likely be fewer players out at night. It was worth taking the chance, especially if he could find another good place before the sun rose. As he exited the house, Seowoon felt a surge of energy. He had been on a move constantly, but he wasn't tired at all. The Ring of Strength had proven to be a game changer. Though his strength had increased significantly, he still felt hunger and thirst, reminding him that Cloyd Survival wasn't too different from reality. He realized he would need to find something to eat soon, and the city should have food for him to grab. With that goal in mind, Seowoon set off toward the city, determined to find sustenance and continue his journey. Every step he took felt a little lighter, and he was more confident in his chances of surviving longer in this brutal world. As the night stretched on, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But first, he needed to eat. He could only hope that this new world would offer the resources he needed to stay alive and grow stronger. Seowoon checked the map, realizing he should be somewhere near the location, but he was unsure of where the houses were. He began to hear a wolf snarling in the distance, and quickly realized that the sound was coming from directly behind him. Instantly, he darted into some bushes, cursing himself for not noticing it sooner. He peeked over, seeing the creature in the distance, feeling his nerves spike. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as he recognized that it wasn't just any wolf. It was a werewolf, and there was another one right behind him. As he sat frozen, the werewolf lunged at him, forcing him to dodge just in time. The creature's attack shattered the nearby tree with brutal force, and now there were two of them, staring directly at him. Seowoon muttered to himself that he thought this was a PvP game, never expecting monsters like these to be a part of it. If he had known, he would have stayed put. He was still a ranker, in name at least, and dying to a mob would be too embarrassing. Noticing a house off in the distance, Seowoon ran toward it, his heart pounding as he approached the door. He slammed it shut behind him, panting heavily as he listened to the werewolves outside. He wondered if they would try to get in. The sound of sniffing came closer, and he realized the creatures must be searching for his scent. Knowing he had to act fast, Seowoon cracked the door open, aiming his crossbow through the small gap. He waited until he had a clear shot, and then fired, sending a bolt through the crack and into the side of one werewolf skull. The creature collapsed and began to vanish into the air. Relieved, Seowoon muttered that the Ring of Strength had made it possible for him to fire the crossbow with just one hand. Now he just needed to deal with the second werewolf. As he reloaded the crossbow, he turned to find the second creature had moved much closer, now directly in front of the door. It charged, smashing through the door with terrifying speed, its claws slashing across Seowoon's cheek. He stumbled backward, shocked, as the werewolf broke through the door. The creature moved in for a follow-up attack, and Seowoon quickly raised the crossbow, firing again. But the werewolf raised its arm, blocking the bolt. With his weapon now useless, Seowoon dropped the crossbow just as the werewolf lunged to finish him off. He panicked, realizing this could be how he was eliminated. But then he remembered the subspace ring. Reaching into it, he pulled out an unfamiliar dagger he had stored. Determined to survive, he imbued the dagger with his Black Star Energy Palm's martial arts and hurled it into the werewolf. The energy-powered dagger pierced through the creature with ease, sending it crashing into the wall. As the werewolf began to disappear in front of him, Seowoon exhaled deeply, a sigh of relief escaping him. He had thought he was a goner, but now he was safe. His heart still racing, he collapsed to his knees, muttering that he was glad he had stashed the throwing dagger earlier. He had been sure he would fail and be eliminated by these mobs, which would have been incredibly embarrassing. Seowoon looked down at a small baggie on the floor, noting it must be a mob drop. He opened it eagerly, but inside, he only found water and jerky. He grumbled, wishing it had been something more useful, though at least he had food for now. He started eating, debating whether to check the area more thoroughly. As he explored the building, he found a piece of armor. It was a bit large for him, but once he put it on, it immediately resized to fit his body. The status window appeared, informing him that the item was an advanced orichalcum breastplate, which significantly increased his resistance to fire and wind magic. Seowoon was impressed by how much it boosted his stats, and he couldn't help but wonder if there were even more powerful items hidden around. He continued to search, his curiosity piqued, but when he bumped his knee into something, he stopped. Looking down, he didn't see what he had hit. He kicked the ground in front of him, wondering if it was a hidden item. Seowoon picked up the item, feeling its texture, which resembled cloth. After putting it on, he discovered that it was called the Night Cloak. The moment it was equipped, he realized that if he remained still in darkness, the cloak allowed him to blend seamlessly with the shadows. While hidden, no magic would detect him, and even the sounds he made were muted. The cloak reminded him of something from a familiar fantasy story, an item of power that allowed its wearer to avoid detection. This cloak was invaluable for survival, enabling Seowoon to avoid anyone who might cross his path during the night. It was the perfect tool for remaining undetected, allowing him to stay alive for as long as needed. As he moved through the area, Seowoon couldn't shake his confusion about the house in the middle of nowhere, but after some consideration, he realized it was part of a farming spot. It seemed his luck might be turning around for the better today. Still, as he walked deeper into the woods under the cover of night, Seowoon reflected on how he hadn't seen anyone. Perhaps it was the result of being dropped into a random location. Lost in thought, he heard footsteps approaching from behind. Turning, Seowoon saw a man running through the forest, disheveled and yelling in frustration. The man seemed to be lamenting that he hadn't had the time to use something, though what exactly it was remained unclear. Seowoon wasted no time donning the night cloak again, slipping into the shadows of a nearby bush. The man did not notice Seowoon as he muttered that he couldn't believe he'd encountered a mage in such a place. Seowoon observed that the man appeared weak, a person easily dealt with, and the thought crossed his mind that he could take him down with little effort. As the man turned to leave, Seowoon reminded himself to stay calm. It was just a game after all, and there was no reason to hesitate. Before Seowoon could make a decision, another man appeared and chanted a spell, an escrow flame, directed from Seowoon's behind. The fire struck the man directly in the back, and Seowoon watched, wondering if he had just killed him. However, when the smoke cleared, there was no body, just a chest. This confirmed that they were, indeed, in a game, and the chest likely contained the man's items. The question lingered in Seowoon's mind. Where had the fire come from? At that moment, a figure appeared from behind, a large-nosed man who walked toward the fallen mage. He scorned the dead man for not being able to use magic properly, calling him unlucky. The large-nosed man claimed that if the mage had been killed by a sword, he wouldn't have felt the excruciating pain of being burned alive. Seowoon considered himself fortunate that he had walked past unnoticed. The cloak had indeed proven its worth, and the mage mused that the man who had died might at least be honored to have met his end at the hands of someone as skilled as himself. Referring to himself as Chiron, the large-nosed man bent over to search the fallen mage's belongings. Seowoon quickly deduced that the man was also a player like him. If he wasn't careful, he could be next. It was clear that in this game, hesitation could cost him his life. Seowoon knew the rules. In order to survive, he had to act without delay. As Big Nose sifted through the items, he sensed an incoming attack from behind. His barrier absorbed the impact of the strike, but it cracked under the pressure. The large-nosed man muttered to himself, blaming the mage for causing the noise. Seowoon raised his crossbow, taking aim and firing a bolt, which hit the barrier again, causing it to crack further. Big Nose realized the barrier was close to breaking. He couldn't pinpoint Seowoon's location, but fired a fireball in his general direction, taunting him to reveal himself rather than hiding like a coward. Seowoon didn't respond. Instead, he quickly readied another throwing knife. A second later, a throwing knife flew out from the bushes, heading straight for Big Nose. He heard the sound of it slicing through the air, and although his barrier absorbed the hit, it shattered completely. Panic spread across his face as he turned in search of Seowoon, still calling for him to reveal himself. Seowoon raised the crossbow for another shot. Big Nose started to chant another escrow flame spell, but before he could finish, a throwing knife struck him directly in the forehead. The large-nosed man disintegrated into dust, and the battle was over. Seowoon watched as the man's last words were an attempt to cast a spell, but before he could finish, his head was taken clean off by the attack. Seowoon, still in disbelief, stared at the scene. He had won. Looking down, he noticed 2 loot boxes lying on the ground. He knew that if someone saw the fire and decided to follow the source, it would be trouble. Quickly, he decided to loot the boxes as fast as possible and get away before anyone arrived. Starting with the chest from Big Nose, Seowoon tossed nearly everything into his subspace storage, even picking up another healing item in the process. Among the items, he discovered an Escrow's necklace, which marked him as a mage of the Escrow Magic Society. This clarified the confusion surrounding the name. Seowoon dismissed the necklace, calling it a useless item with no properties, and decided to store it for later. As he continued to sort through the loot, one item caught his attention: the Circle Stone. It was an artifact that allowed the user to engrave a circle around their heart, granting them the ability to use mana. Once used, it would enable the user to learn the magic of the circle. Seowoon was intrigued, wondering if using the stone would turn him into a mage. His thoughts then returned to the man who had been running earlier, whose words now made sense where he wished for more time to use this. Seowoon felt a pang of guilt, but decided he would put it to good use instead. With a sigh, he stashed the remaining items into his inventory to review them later, when he found a safer location. Seowoon ventured deeper into the forest, climbing a hill and scanning the area. He needed to find a spot where he could use the circle stone. In the distance, he spotted some houses and made his way toward them, thinking they would be a suitable place. Once inside, the stone prompted him, asking if he was sure about using it. Without hesitation, Seowoon confirmed in his mind that he was ready. The stone warned him that using it would require him to remain motionless for 3 hours, unable to perform any actions or use items. It also mentioned the slight pain that would accompany the formation of the circle. The moment he activated it, Seowoon's chest tightened, and waves of intense pain began to surge through him. He stifled his screams, enduring the excruciating agony for the next 3 hours. By the end, Seowoon lay on the floor, drooling from the pain, his body still racked with discomfort. He had expected a mild ache, but the ordeal felt like it might have broken him. He muttered to himself that learning martial arts had been difficult, but magic was on an entirely different level. Once he gathered himself, Seowoon opened his status window. To his surprise, it now showed 2 job classes, and he had unlocked a new stat: mana. He looked at the survivors list, curious to see how many were left. After the 2 men's deaths, the number of survivors should have decreased, but when the list appeared, Seowoon was stunned. Only 45 participants remained, with a name standing out: Nam Sagwan. This person had been systematically eliminating others, taking out nearly everyone on the list. Nam Sagwan went into action just hours earlier. He was perched high in a tree, watching his next victim from above. The man on the ground stumbled over a rock, a comical sight given his size. Nam Sagwan chuckled to himself, enjoying the scene. He was after something simple, getting into the top 90. As the man begged for his life, Sagwan raised his hand, stretching it toward the man's face. In a swift motion, he popped the man's head like a zit, sending a clear message to everyone. They would all come to know his name. With a smug grin, he moved on without looting the body. His only concern was making sure the participants knew who he was: Nam Sagwan, a name to be. Now, Seowoon was stunned by the number of people who had died in such a short time. He couldn't believe how many had perished overnight. He silently hoped he wouldn't run into Nam Sagwan anytime soon. The thought of surviving long enough to reach the top 10 crossed his mind, and Seowoon wondered what the reward for such an accomplishment would be. He speculated that it might be money or rare items. However, the idea that intrigued him the most was whether reaching the top 10 would grant him the ability to bring the skills and items from this game back to the real world. Seowoon sighed, realizing that while there was a killer wreaking havoc outside, he had been getting ahead of himself. He knew it was time to wrap things up and start moving. He could feel a power growing within him, and he wondered if this was what mana felt like. He also recalled finding a magic book while looting the previous day, titled The Magic Book of Windball. The book explained how to create a wind sphere, and the number of spheres one could generate increased with the user's power. Seowoon knew this was the magic he had been seeking, and the question of whether to use it popped up. He clicked yes, and the book vanished from his hands. He blinked, wondering if that was all, if the magic had simply been implanted in his mind. His hand moved instinctively as he began to chant a scroll magic. He gathered mana in his palm, and soon, four wind spheres materialized in the air. They didn't look impressive, and Seowoon wondered if this was really all there was to it. He raised his hand, as if dismissing the spheres, and they floated backward. When they collided with the wall, a massive explosion shook the ground behind him. Seowoon's eyes widened in realization. The spheres were far more powerful than they seemed. This would certainly come in handy, though he was suddenly overwhelmed with exhaustion. He muttered that it was likely from using the magic, his body drained from the effort. As time passed, Seowoon noticed the restricted area on his map slowly shrinking. He decided to stay near the boundary, farming at the edges where his chances of encountering another player were lower. With half of them already eliminated, he knew he needed to work quickly before the restricted zone diminished further. Unknown to him, an old man watched from a treetop, silent and still, observing Seowoon's movements. The mysterious old man muttered to himself that this was interesting before leaping forward, disappearing from sight. Hours later, Seowoon remembered seeing houses marked on the map. He was surprised, however, to find only loot boxes scattered on the ground, surrounded by blood. His heart raced as footsteps approached from behind. Panicking, he activated the windball magic and fired it at the source of the sound, causing the door ahead to explode. He stood still, uncertain, wondering if it was truly just the wind or if someone had been lurking nearby. What he saw through the door stunned him. Blood was everywhere. He deduced that the person inside must have been severely injured. Given their survival so far, they likely had valuable items. Seowoon considered the possibility of taking them down, but then he decided that his survival should come first. He quickly left the area. On the other side of the door, after Seowoon had gone, the man inside sighed in relief. He muttered that if Seowoon had found him, he would have been killed, but fortunately, he had managed to hide in time. Though, he thought, if he hadn't been injured, he would have taken care of Seowoon easily. Now, he just needed to loot and leave quickly. But before he could move, an arrow struck him in the side of the head. Realizing he had been baited, the man's body began to disappear as he died. From a distance, Seowoon observed the scene, silently thanking the man for falling for his trap. He decided to farm the area quickly and then head to the edges of the restricted zone. As he moved along, the mysterious old man appeared out of sudden and spoke. He commented that Seowoon seemed quite skilled. Seowoon suddenly realized he had let his guard down. The old man reassured him, saying there was no need to be scared. He only wished to ask a few questions. Still cautious, Seowoon asked who the man was. The old man chuckled, replying that Seowoon likely wouldn't know even if he told him, as they all came from different lives. Seowoon nodded, remarking that the old man seemed very different from everyone else he had encountered so far. The old man then asked if Seowoon had participated in this kind of play before. Seowoon asked the old man what he meant by play. The old man smiled faintly, explaining that he had been watching Seowoon for a while and had noticed how quickly he adapted. He was certain Seowoon already knew that this situation wasn't real. Still curious, Seowoon wondered how long the old man had been observing him and how he had managed to remain undetected. Nervously, he answered, saying that it was Seowoon's first time being brought here, but that he had played a similar game in the world he had come from. Somewhat intrigued, Seowoon inwardly thought that he could tell from the old man's appearance that he was definitely not from the same world. The old man glanced up at the sky, noticing the fading light. He observed that it had gotten dark, to which Seowoon agreed, remarking that it was already the third day. The old man then asked if the moon in Seowoon's world was as large as the one in this world. Looking up, Seowoon admitted he hadn't really noticed how big it was, but confirmed that it appeared far larger here. The old man nodded in agreement. The old man then asked Seowoon to explain the game he had mentioned. Seowoon hesitated, cautioning that they could be ambushed in this area. He suggested they find a safer place to talk. The old man seemed to consider this, then said it could indeed be a long conversation. He added that they should leave and find somewhere more secure. Still unsure, Seowoon questioned how he knew the old man wouldn't just kill him. The old man didn't reply with words, but instead grabbed Seowoon and swiftly began hopping from tree to tree, effortlessly carrying Seowoon with him. The speed at which they moved was astonishing, so fast that Seowoon's cheeks flapped in the wind as he was carried through the air. Unable to fully comprehend the situation at the time, Seowoon reflected that he had no idea what kind of consequences their encounter would bring. Later that night, after a bit of explaining, the old man remarked that Seowoon's world seemed very magical. In turn, Seowoon explained that he wasn't sure how to describe it, but that it was a place of highly advanced civilization. The old man seemed intrigued, noting that this might explain how Seowoon had adapted to this world so quickly. Still curious, Seowoon cursed in his mind, wondered how long the old man had been watching him. As if reading Seowoon's thoughts, the old man replied casually that he had been with Seowoon from the moment they were dropped into this world. A little taken aback, Seowoon wondered if the old man had been reading his mind. The old man laughed lightly, saying that he hadn't been reading his thoughts, only observing his actions closely. The old man explained further that he had originally planned to enjoy the fresh air of the high mountains for the next 100 days. However, he had been intrigued by Seowoon's actions and decided to approach him. The old man assured Seowoon that he had no intention of harming him, so there was no need for him to remain cautious. Still unsure of the old man's intentions, Seowoon said that he had no idea why they were brought here. The old man acknowledged this as he asked if Seowoon had something similar in his world. In turn, Seowoon remarked that it was merely a type of game meant for fun with no real consequences. Nobody really died in such games. He speculated that when it came to the motives of the supernatural beings who had the power to abduct people from another world, he had no way of knowing their true intentions. The old man listened thoughtfully before acknowledging that Seowoon was likely correct. Seowoon continued, saying that the game could become a huge opportunity for someone, though. The old man asked what he meant by that, and Seowoon explained that he was sure the old man already understood, but he pointed out that dying in the game wasn't the same as dying in real life. Once a person died here, they would be assigned a rank and a corresponding reward. Seowoon believed these rewards would include items obtained in the game. The old man asked if Seowoon meant the items he had on him. Seowoon nodded, but he added that it wasn't just about the items. Skills and martial arts learned in the game might also be part of the rewards. Of course, he had no proof of this yet. The old man was intrigued by Seowoon's perspective, remarking that magic was indeed fascinating. He asked if Seowoon truly believed this game could offer an opportunity. Seowoon thought for a moment before responding. He admitted that the old man likely wouldn't need such an opportunity, but for those who struggled in life, the abilities learned here could be life-changing. Wondered further, the old man asked Seowoon what made him think that the old man's life was without struggles. Looking at the old man, Seowoon considered the question. He replied that the old man seemed like a martial arts master, and surely he had followers back in his world. In contrast, Seowoon felt that he had no real use in his world and wasn't even comparable to someone of the old man's stature. Seowoon explained that the game could be a huge opportunity for people who were struggling in life. The old man laughed loudly, finding Seowoon's perspective amusing. He couldn't help but chuckle at the thought, but Seowoon quickly told him to quiet down. Curious, the old man asked what Seowoon kept doing by touching the air. Slightly embarrassed, Seowoon explained that the old man probably didn't know how to turn on the map. He had briefly shared some tips and tricks with him that might be useful in his world, and Seowoon had heard stories about the old man's past as well. Morning arrived quickly, and the old man lightly landed the ground. It was morning, and he realized that he had taken up more of Seowoon's time than he intended. He then dropped Seowoon back to the ground gently. However, Seowoon reassured him that staying with him had probably been the best way to stay safe. He expressed how much he had enjoyed hearing the old man's stories. Intrigued, the old man replied that since he had learned so much about the game from Seowoon, he wondered if there was something he could do in return. Looking hopeful, Seowoon asked if it would be possible to learn some of the old man's martial arts. If he wanted to survive until the end of the game, he knew he would need the old man's help. The old man studied Seowoon for a moment before answering. It wasn't impossible, but the old man warned him that he would have to be prepared for the worst. Unsure of what that meant, Seowoon asked for clarification. The old man's response was blunt, telling Seowoon that death was a part of the price. To succeed outside the traditional means, he would need to pay a hefty price, and the old man asked if Seowoon was prepared for that. Replying bluntly, Seowoon repeated that people didn't die here for real. The old man paused and considered Seowoon's words, then admitted that Seowoon was right. If that was the case, then using the method the old man had in mind could indeed be possible. Seowoon eagerly asked if it would make him stronger. The old man nodded. It would be worth trying at least, he said. He then instructed Seowoon to check how much inner energy he had. Placing his palm on Seowoon's head, the old man was immediately surprised by how little energy Seowoon had. He remarked that it was less than even his dog's, asking how Seowoon could be so weak. Slightly embarrassed, Seowoon explained that there was no such thing as martial arts or inner energy in his world. Unperturbed, the old man told Seowoon to assume the lotus position. He continued to press his palm on Seowoon's head. Seowoon was told that he would experience pain, a pain akin to death itself. But the old man emphasized that he mustn't move. Nervously, Seowoon asked what he should do. The old man's instructions were clear. He had to endure the pain, because if he failed, he would die. As the old man began transferring his inner energy throughout Seowoon's body, his senses went into overdrive. The wind against his skin felt like sharp blades, and even breathing felt like poison coursing through him. He could hear the sound of ants crawling on the grass, every tiny detail heightened. Suddenly, an intense, sharp pain shot up through his body, reaching the upper one. Seowoon let out a scream, and energy beams shot out from his mouth and eyes. He wondered if this was how he would die as sweat poured from his body. Everything around him seemed frozen, and he felt something being implanted inside him. A seemingly endless moment later, he was simply sweating profusely. The technique that the old man imparted were a success. Seowoon immediately fought back the urge to vomit, but after a brief moment, he let it all out. The old man observed Seowoon for a moment before commenting that Seowoon had endured well. He noted that Seowoon's body wasn't bad and that he had an innate disposition. Once the flow of his inner energy was fixed, the old man assured him that Seowoon's body would feel different, stronger. Still reeling from the experience, Seowoon asked what he needed to do next. The old man reminded him of his desire to get stronger quickly. Seowoon nodded, eager to move forward. The old man explained that he had pushed Seowoon's soul slightly away from his body and had created an inspiratory gate in that space. People were born to absorb the world's energy solely through breathing, the old man explained as he gestured, continuing his teachings. Now, with the new gate in place, Seowoon could absorb special energy, not just through breathing. He asked the old man what had changed, and the old man explained that people consisted of mind, body, and soul, and these three elements were held together by life energy. He asked Seowoon to guess what happened to that life energy when someone died. After a brief pause, Seowoon guessed that it must disappear, but the old man corrected him. He provided a real-world example, a water droplet on a leaf poised to fall. As it started to drop, the old man explained that the life energy did not disappear, but rather dispersed. When the droplet met the ground, it spread out, and in the same way, the life energy spread throughout nature, continuing the cycle of life. The old man further explained that some saw this natural cycle as a waste. They murdered others to absorb their life energy, but those who followed this path were always in an unstable state. Eventually, their balance of yin and yang shattered, causing them to lose their martial arts or die. The mind technique the old man had passed on to Seowoon allowed him to absorb the scattered life energy, much like those who had followed this path, to increase his inner energy. Clearly unsettled, Seowoon asked if the old man had just given him a guaranteed path to death. The old man, seeming to consider the question, responded that Seowoon was a bit different. Unlike those who reconstructed their veins to create a gate, the old man had used Seowoon's soul for it. Since Seowoon had no inner energy at all, it was like a blank sheet. The old man had tweaked his veins to allow Seowoon to absorb the life energy harmoniously. He then asked if Seowoon understood why he had given him a mind technique that was forbidden in his original world. Contemplating for a moment, Seowoon replied that it must have been because of the game's setting. Impressed by Seowoon's quick grasp of the situation, the old man confirmed this. He explained that he had felt the presence of life energy in the areas where people had died. The biggest issue with this mind technique was that it could only succeed greatly through murder. However, the old man pointed out that in this world there was no issue. To survive, Seowoon had to eliminate others, and after the 100 days, he would have reached quite a high level. The old man then told Seowoon it was time for them to part ways. He expressed that it would be nice to see him again, but Seowoon stopped him, saying that he had helped so much and deserved to at least know the old man's name. With a calm smile, the old man introduced himself as Jang Dokian, known to everyone as Deep Valley Standing Kindly. He mentioned that the mind technique he had taught Seowoon was called the White Martial Physique Arts. Seowoon bowed deeply, promising that he would never forget this. Jang Dokian advised Seowoon to get used to breathing deeply, and if he continued to accumulate inner energy through his dantian, he would grow stronger over time. He then remembered how to open the map as Seowoon had shown him, calling it a very convenient tool. With a final farewell, the old man said that they would meet again when the opportunity arose. Seowoon watched as Jang Dokian soared through the air, vanishing quickly. He marveled at how fast the old man had disappeared, commenting that it was to be expected of someone like him. If Seowoon could master the same movement techniques, he thought he would be able to move as freely as the old man. With his thoughts settled, Seowoon decided to continue with his original plan and head back to the outskirts. Though he had been abducted and dragged to the center in an instant, the walk back took him half a day. As he hid in some bushes near a house with its lights on, Seowoon muttered that it seemed like the same situation as last time. Either the house was empty, or it was a noob who didn't know how to turn off the lights. Regardless, he was determined to go in. He ran toward the house, slipping inside and checking his corners before slowly clearing the rooms. He noticed the light upstairs turn off and muttered that he had been right. It was time to farm for items. However, after a while of searching, he sighed in disappointment. The house yielded nothing useful. It was filled with only useless items, a small healing scroll, and some jerky. Seowoon realized he had come for nothing. He yawned, muttering that he hadn't slept at all the previous night because he had spent so much time talking with the elder. Now exhausted, he knew it was finally time to catch some rest. He fell into a peaceful sleep, the exhaustion from the previous days catching up with him. The morning arrived, and his sleep was interrupted when he heard footsteps approaching. A voice pierced the stillness, a man saying that the house didn't seem empty. Seowoon immediately recognized the man was right outside. He slowly reached for his crossbow, cursing his defenselessness. He waited, tense by the door. As the door opened, the man entered, and Seowoon took in a deep breath, preparing himself. The man looked around, saying he could finally rest, but he was quickly stunned to find himself staring down the barrel of a crossbow. Seowoon squeezed the trigger, shooting the bolt toward the man. In an instant, the man drew his sword and sliced the bolt in midair. Seowoon couldn't believe he was fighting a martial artist, muttering that this was becoming an annoyance. Without hesitation, Seowoon reached into his subspace, pulling out a set of throwing knives. Using the Black Star Energy Palm technique, he launched them at the man. One of the knives was blocked by the man's arm, who sneered and called Seowoon a coward for relying on hidden weapons. Undeterred, Seowoon closed the distance between them. He grabbed the side of the man's head with his palm and threw him to the ground. With swift motion, Seowoon kicked the man's weapon away and told him that he had been having a nice dream until the man had woken him up as he raised the crossbow bolt high into the air. The man pleaded for his life, saying that he would do anything. He couldn't die here, not after struggling so much to survive. But with a cold gaze, Seowoon stabbed him directly in the forehead. The kill feed flashed on screen, revealing that the man's name was Xiao Long and that he had died from an arrowhead shot. Seowoon bathed in blood, muttered to himself that he refused to die here either. No hesitation in his voice and action. He had transmigrated abruptly in an unfamiliar world. Yet, despite facing a life-and-death instance repeatedly, Seowoon was capable of executing a quick and swift decision. As the last echoes of conflict faded, the shifting dust revealed a subtle difference in the aftermath. Seowoon's eyes, sharp and perceptive, caught the change. A soft green luminescence drifted through the air where, moments before, a man had collapsed in death. His body was gone, erased without a trace. In its place rested a solitary chest, quietly glowing amidst the haze. Seowoon's gaze locked onto the object. This was no ordinary remnant. It was exactly what Elder Jang Dokian had spoken of, the moment of transfer, the aftermath of death, and the energy that remained. As Seowoon stood, the gentle energy rushed toward him, as though it sensed his presence. Wisps of green energy slithered outwards, weaving around his fingers in an uncanny way. The warmth and movement coursing through the tendrils were unlike anything Seowoon had experienced. As they touched his skin, they didn't just linger, they entered. In an instant, the calm was shattered. A brilliant surge of light erupted from the chest, engulfing Seowoon in a radiant explosion. He remained still, centered within the glow, every muscle tense. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the energy subsided, and the silence returned as the glow faded. Seowoon stood amidst it all, frozen in contemplation. He lowered his gaze to his hands, now steady but tingling with latent force. He had killed one man, absorbed one fragment of vitality, and yet his body felt transformed. Power pulsed through his limbs, strong and constant, as if a dam had broken and the current had made a new home within him. Driven by a mix of curiosity and urgency, Seowoon called out the system. His vision shifted slightly as the interface responded. Among the stats, one line caught his attention. Internal energy 20. The energy he had just absorbed had taken quantifiable form. He wondered briefly, was that all the man had held? Or had he only taken a portion? A slow grin spread across Seowoon's face. The pieces aligned in his mind. Elder Jang Dokian's cryptic teachings now made sense. Even without striking the final blow in every encounter, Seowoon understood now that securing vitality was essential. What mattered was the energy left behind and the strength it offered. Turning his attention outward, Seowoon swiped through the interface and opened the survivor status. The numbers told a new story. His breath hitched. A detail stood out. Something had changed. His eyes scanned the interface rapidly. Then came a confirmation. One less. The total count had dropped. From 24 to 23. Seowoon stood in silence. The system log appeared, detailing the event. Nam Sagwan had killed Karl Verstappen. Far away, at the scene, Karl Verstappen lay broken, his stomach carved open by a brutal strike. The final remnants of energy shimmered around him as his breath thinned. With effort, he released the name of his killer. Nam Sagwan. A final flicker danced above his body, then vanished. His corpse followed, dissolving into fading particles. Where he had died, another chest formed, humming with pale blue light. Wisps floated gently above it, dancing like smoke in moonlight, the quiet residue of loss. Nam Sagwan walked away without concerning himself with the chest. He glanced at his hands, still smeared with blood, and let out a scoff. He had anticipated a challenge. Karl had made the first move. But in the end, there had been no struggle. Just another empty fight and another meaningless death. With a tired exhale, Nam Sagwan turned his back on the remnants of the battle. The screen floated before him, softly glowing. He raised his head and addressed the system again. The interface responded swiftly. The word survivor echoed across the field in command. The number displayed, 22 participants still alive. Nam Sagwan let out a scoff, his tone edged with disbelief as he questioned how so many contestants could still be alive. Something on the system's screen shifted, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Blood smeared across his face and neck emphasized the rawness of the battlefield. But within his gaze, something more deliberate formed, a glint of recognition, or perhaps intrigue, directed at the name that stood out among so many. He spoke of Seowoon's name out loud. Elsewhere, far from the front lines, Seowoon sat in a dim room, his posture tense and alert. His eyes locked onto the notification. The name Nam Sagwan burned itself into his thoughts. Of all the names that appeared on the kill logs, that one stood above the rest. A chill ran down Seowoon's spine, and beads of sweat traced silent paths through the blood and grime, streaking his face. His mind raced through grim calculations. If survival was the goal, then Nam Sagwan was the one person who must be avoided at all costs. What he once thought of as a harrowing battle revealed itself for what it truly was, an encounter with a minor opponent. If that struggle had left him on the verge of collapse, then the thought of facing Nam Sagwan became nothing short of a death sentence. Opening the chest, Seowoon found only a single item, refined troll potion. Nothing else remained of value. If the man had carried better gear or healing items, perhaps the fight would have been different. Rather than charge headfirst into another confrontation, Seowoon made a different choice. He would withdraw, keep to the shadows, and allow the field to cull itself. He would strike when the time was right. With that in mind, he set his path toward the perimeter of the map, aiming for the outer reaches of the restricted zone. There, deep in the forest, he planned to wait out the bloodshed. 1 week passed. Within the thick canopy of the forest, a pair of glowing red eyes flashed in the underbrush. A low snarl broke the silence. The same beast he had once faced now returned, its body radiating menace and strength. Without hesitation, he raised his crossbow and fired. The bolt struck true, detonating into a burst of light that tore through the creature. The beast disintegrated instantly, dropping its loot. Seowoon commented dispassionately that the creature would be dinner. Traversing the edge of the zone, he remained alert. No other combatants had crossed his path. It was clear why. He had stuck to the margins, carefully avoiding the active killing fields. Then a chime broke through the forest. A translucent notification flickered into view. Cloyd Survival Day 12. Seowoon stood at the very edge of the hexagonal boundary, the outer limit of the restricted zone. The barrier hummed softly, its glow casting faint reflections against the trees. Reaching out, Seowoon pressed his palm to it. A tremor climbed up his arm. Numbness followed, crawling across his skin like frost. If he passed through the barrier, even movement might become impossible. His thoughts turned to Nam Sagwan again. Over the past week, the logs had displayed no other names. Nam Sagwan stood alone as the hunter. The silence across the battlefield was proof enough. No one dared challenge him directly. Seowoon suddenly froze. A flicker on the horizon caught his eye. Keeping low, he crept through the grass. In the distance, a thin column of smoke curled into the air. He narrowed his eyes and changed course, cautiously approaching. The battleground was raw, unsettled. Nam Sagwan stood at the center, his chest rising and falling with labored breath. Around him stood a gathering of powerful contenders. Each one exuded strength, their stances rigid and determined. They had all arrived with one goal in mind, to eliminate Nam Sagwan. One among the group addressed Nam Sagwan, stating flatly that he had no hope of victory and should resign himself to a quiet death. Nam Sagwan released a short, amused breath, a sound halfway between a chuckle and a scoff. The notion that it took a full mob to corner a single opponent seemed laughable to him. Crouching slightly, he continued with grim satisfaction, declaring that their arrival had been helpful. Rather than expend the effort to seek them out one by one, they had all come to him. The grin deepened into something far more sinister. He offered a final warning. If they intended to kill him, they had best be prepared to offer their lives in exchange. With absolute certainty, he vowed to make them understand the cost. Cracks shot across the ground as an immense surge of force erupted outward. Nam Sagwan's aura detonated in a violent wave, sending a pressure shockwave that rippled through the group. Startled by the sudden burst of raw energy, several opponents flinched, staggered by the overwhelming force. Some instinctively dropped into defensive postures. Others locked in place, preparing for an impact that never came immediately. Without hesitation, Nam Sagwan descended like a meteor, cutting through the air with lethal intent. His trajectory wasn't upward flight, it was a strike. He crashed down into the center of the gathered enemies, his hands smashing into one target with merciless precision. The enemy had no time to react, defenses crumpling under the devastating blow. His attack didn't end with the strike. The momentum carried through, his hand penetrating bone and skull alike, driving straight through the target's head with horrifying finality. A burst of blue energy detonated from the impact, lightning through the air in jagged shards. Blood and splinters rained to the ground. Those watching stood in stunned silence. Blood spattered across the ground and even onto the armor of the nearby fighters. Disbelief twisted their faces. One of them erupted in frustration, screaming in outrage, unable to comprehend how a single strike had yielded such carnage. Nam Sagwan did not wait. The next moment, he moved, slashing through the air with a brilliant arc of red energy. The attack tore into the ranks, scattering bodies in all directions. Sparks flew, blood sprayed, and the battlefield screamed with violence. Armor shattered, limbs contorted, and the sounds of agony rang out across the dust-choked field. Blue energy sparked, blood flashed. One after another, lives vanished beneath his attacks. There was no rhythm, no sequence to follow. No one countered, no one pressed him back. It wasn't a duel. It wasn't even a battle. It was slaughter. The next strike carved upward in a clean arc, severing a leg with surgical precision. Blood sprayed, and body parts spun into the air. The opponent crumpled without even a chance to cry out. There was no need for observers. No need to witness the destruction firsthand. The kill log spoke for itself. No other names appeared. No other battles were in motion. Nam Sagwan alone filled the screen. Barring catastrophe, the outcome was set. The strongest was already clear. This contest had one inevitable victor. Seowoon stood frozen, eyes fixed on the glowing kill log. One after another, names slid across the screen. All claimed by Nam Sagwan. All through martial arts. The numbers weren't the only thing that troubled him. He questioned aloud whether Nam Sagwan was even following the rules of the game. A storm with no equal. Back on the battlefield, Nam Sagwan stood amidst the aftermath, his breathing labored but composed. Blood soaked his face, yet his expression remained unshaken. As he walked off, he dismissed them all as insignificant, mere nobodies. Muttering under his breath, he voiced his irritation at the lingering stench, showing no sign of remorse for the destruction he had left behind. Scattered across the blood-soaked ground behind him were only remnants. Chest boxes and loot, the final remains of those he had slain. Wiping the blood from his face with slow indifference, he carried no weight from what had transpired. His thoughts drifted forward, already several steps ahead of the present, as if the massacre meant nothing. Night descended upon the battlefield. Nam Sagwan was gone. Nothing stirred among the bodies, and all that remained were scattered chest boxes and a single magic staff, its surface glowing faintly in the growing darkness. Then a figure stepped into the clearing. Mist swirled quietly at their feet as they approached. Robes brushed through the grass with every calm, deliberate stride. The figure moved closer, eyes falling on the faintly glowing staff embedded in the ground. A shadow passed across their face. Reaching out, the figure lifted the staff with deliberate care, recognizing the staff had belonged to Elizabeth. It wasn't loud, but rooted deep. Rage settled behind his eyes. He whispered a vow over the staff, Elizabeth's name spoken first as tribute, then as a promise. Her death would not go unanswered. He declared his intent aloud. The oath rang clear through the night that he will bring vengeance. The man raised his gaze to the heavens, swearing on the name of Escrow. Elsewhere, under the same moonlit canopy, Seawoon stood quietly within the forest. A single thought echoed through his mind. There were now only 11 survivors left. If he could just endure a little longer, maybe he could reach the top 10. That was the hope he held on to. But after what he had seen earlier, the devastation, the sheer disparity in strength, his confidence had begun to fracture. Facing someone like Nam Sagwan, that would require something powerful enough to even the odds. His eyes dropped to the castle below. Even from a distance, its silhouette carried an air of significance. In his mind, Seawoon calculated his chances. The restricted zone would likely expand past this area by morning. The mansion might be the final opportunity to find something useful. Moonlight guided his approach. Seawoon moved swiftly, crossing the outer gardens toward the mansion's looming entrance. He pressed his hand to the heavy wooden door and eased it open. A soft glow spilled out from within, casting light across his worn cloak. He paused briefly, peering into the shadows inside. A quiet gasp escaped him. His voice was low, barely audible. The sight before him was far beyond expectation. The interior stretched before him in grand majesty. Towering marble pillars reached for the high ceilings. Intricately carved statues loomed over the halls. Moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the floor in fragmented hues. He paused at the foot of a grand staircase, taking it all in with quiet awe. Then a shimmer caught his attention. A full suit of Royal Guard armor stood displayed against the wall. A system prompt blinked into view. The armor required a strength stat far beyond his current level. His eyes narrowed as he checked his stats, just 30. With a short breath, he dismissed the idea. It would only weigh him down. No point in carrying what couldn't be used. He turned from the armor and resumed scanning the room. The mansion might still hold something that could change his fate. He resumed his search through the mansion's endless corridors, his voice low and persistent as he muttered that something useful had to be hidden within these halls. As his gaze swept across the room, a faint glimmer on one of the high shelves caught his attention. Approaching cautiously, he reached up and pulled the item down. A glowing bottle sat in his hands, pulsing gently with energy. As he examined it, a system notification materialized before his eyes. Elixir of Insight increases internal energy. Excitement surged through him. His voice trembled slightly, though no one else was present to hear it. He glanced around the vast hall again, still struggling to believe what he had found. And the surprises hadn't stopped. As he ventured deeper, Seawoon's eyes locked onto something else. A glowing book lying on a pedestal, radiating gentle light. Acquired. Secrets of the Unbreakable Fist. Martial Arts Manual. The mansion truly was a vault of rare and powerful gear. He felt his voice rise involuntarily, filled with amazement. After the trials he had endured, stumbling into a place like this seemed surreal. As his steps echoed softly on the marble floor, he began to plan. Then something shifted. His eyes dropped to the floor, where something strange caught his eye, a hatch partially concealed beneath a nearby rug. Before he could act further, a deafening explosion erupted from beneath him. Flames surged upward, debris ripping through the space in violent arcs of red and yellow. Heat slammed into his body as a roaring blast filled the corridor. Seawoon's limbs froze, the sheer force of the explosion momentarily paralyzing him. His ears rang as the light flared, scattering shards of masonry through the air. He was airborne before he even knew it. The shockwave hurled him back, his form twisting mid-flight. His voice broke free instinctively in a panicked shout, the fire chasing him down the hallway. He hit the ground hard, sliding across the stone as heat scorched past him. The pain was sharp, but the panic sharper. Then, another explosion. Behind him, the second blast struck like a hammer, sending him hurtling once again. His body spun, flames licking at his sides, his senses overwhelmed. He didn't think he couldn't. Instinct took over, so he ducked low. He launched himself toward a patch of brush just outside the castle. Panting hard, he dared to peek through the branches. The chaos behind him still glowed, but the immediate danger seemed to have passed. He looked around warily, brain racing to piece together what had just happened. Then, through the smoke and rising heat, he spotted movement. A figure appeared on the edge of the blast zone. His breath caught in his throat. Long blonde hair danced in the breeze. An ornate staff pulsed softly in the man's grip. Magic still lingered on its surface. Amid the searing flames, Escrow stood unshaken. His gaze remained fixed on the figure ahead, now barely visible beyond the distortion of heat and smoke. The one who faced him now had not reached this point through luck alone. Nam Sagwan stood firm at the center of the scorched earth, flames dancing along the edges of his silhouette. The embers fluttered between them as Nam Sagwan's voice cut through the air. If Escrow had time to posture and preach, then he should be using it to attack. Without waiting for a reply, Nam Sagwan dropped into a combat stance. Muscles coiled, eyes honed in, his form radiated raw intention. He was ready. Across from him, Escrow narrowed his eyes and smirked. The mage responded with venom in his tone, a sharp retort filled with taunting defiance. The air between them bristled as their hostility ignited into something volatile. Nam Sagwan barked a grin in reply, his expression unfazed. His glare sharpened further as he hurled his own insult. Hidden behind the bushes, Seawoon watched in stunned silence. The two monsters before him carried the weight of something far beyond any conflict he had encountered so far. The one who had caused so much chaos was just a kid. From the opposite end of the battlefield, Escrow's voice rang out. He called Nam Sagwan an impudent brat, his words laced with scorn as he tightened his grip on the ornate staff in his hands. The air around him shimmered with building energy. Seawoon tensed in the undergrowth, his breath catching as the temperature shifted. Raising his staff toward the sky, Escrow invoked the incantation with absolute authority. His voice echoed like thunder, announcing his command as the heavens above responded. Dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed. Lightning danced through the forming storm. A blinding flash split the sky. Thunder cracked like the roar of a titan as a colossal bolt of lightning crashed down from the stormfront. The spell had been cast. Aimed with unerring precision, the bolt hurtled toward its target with devastating intent. But Nam Sagwan had already moved. The spell hit the ground behind him with earth-shattering force, tearing through stone and sending shockwaves across the field. Escrow shouted again, fury breaking through his composed exterior. He demanded to know how long his opponent planned to keep dodging. His voice cracked like a whip, and this time, he invoked Elizabeth's name, challenging his foe to face him directly. Nam Sagwan landed in a crouch, the flames curling around his boots. He didn't respond aloud, but his eyes betrayed an edge of contemplation. Even in the Central Plains, where countless battles had shaped him, he had never faced something quite like this. Across the field, Escrow gritted his teeth. Frustration pushed past restraint as he growled out his next insult, branding Nam Sagwan as a rat-like coward. With a forceful sweep of his arms, he summoned another surge of magic. The sky above cracked open again, light fracturing in all directions. Unleashing everything, Escrow bellowed a final declaration. He would end it here, finish this opponent once and for all. His form rose into the sky, wreathed in blinding light. Lightning coiled around him like a crown. From above, they descended like a divine retribution, thunder spiraling with his motion. Every inch of the sky screamed with energy. Bolts tore through the clouds, converging on his outstretched arms. Nam Sagwan's eyes widened, his breath caught for a fraction of a second. The sheer magnitude of the incoming force froze him in place. For a moment, even he faltered. Then instinct returned. At the last possible moment, he dove aside. The lightning struck where he had stood, obliterating the stone floor, and sending molten fragments in every direction. He rolled midair, eyes scanning the sky as the storm raged on. Electric arcs surged in every direction as Nam Sagwan twisted through them. Sparks grazed his side. Craters erupted behind him. The speed and intensity of his movements were nearly inhuman. Weaving through the magical onslaught, he pressed forward. Every dodge narrowed the gap. Instead of retreating, Nam Sagwan surged forward, upward, rising into the heart of the storm itself. Bolts of energy flashed past him, searing through the air, but he pressed on, his form cutting through the chaos with unwavering intent. The earth below was engulfed in blinding light as another bolt struck down, but Nam Sagwan did not falter. Power coiled around him, raw and electric. He twisted midair, preparing a counterstrike, his movements fluid and calculated. Escrow's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched the figure rise through the heart of the very storm he had summoned. Nam Sagwan had bypassed the devastating spell completely. Crackling blue energy surged through Nam Sagwan's arm as he launched his next move. His hand ignited with power, and his gaze locked onto Escrow without hesitation. Escrow moved forward, swinging the staff with sudden aggression. A furious shout accompanied the blow as he demanded his opponent fall before him. The staff met not resistance as it clashed with Nam Sagwan's strike. But something in Escrow's focus wavered. Alarmed, he realized it wasn't real. Whatever he had seen had only been an illusion. He inhaled sharply, calming himself midair and recentering his thoughts. Not far off, still concealed above in the foliage, Seowoon observed the battle unfold with tense anticipation. What caught him off guard, however, was not the duel, but the sudden change in the sky. Rain began to fall. Escrow hovered in the downpour, his expression unreadable beneath the veil of rain. Activating item detection yielded nothing. Nam Sagwan was gone. Somehow, without a trace, he had escaped. Realization dawned. His opponent had vanished beyond reach. The composure Escrow had fought to maintain finally cracked. Rage took hold. His voice tore through the storm as he screamed Nam Sagwan's name into the night, vowing to hunt him down, no matter the distance. Deep within the forest, Nam Sagwan ran. The rain soaked him to the bone, his breath ragged and shallow. Pain etched itself into every movement as he pushed through trees and mud, one hand pressed tightly against his side. That spell-casting bastard had caught him off guard. But there would be no next time like this one. Next time, it would end on his terms. With a cold glare, Nam Sagwan swore silently to end Escrow with his own hands. First, though, survival took precedence. He needed time to recover, to plan. His figure slipped through the woods, swallowed by the darkness and rain, disappearing beneath the glow of the full moon. Back near the battlefield, Escrow descended briefly, scanning the ground one last time before vanishing into the storm himself. Still hidden in the bushes, Seowoon watched silently. The reason he hadn't been spotted was simple. The cloak of invisibility he had equipped. Thanks to it, he had managed to avoid becoming collateral in the confrontation. With it, he had survived yet another day. After all the destruction, neither Escrow nor Nam Sagwan would likely return to this place soon. That worked in his favor. Through the curtain of rain, he spotted it. The hatch. He approached cautiously, inspecting the edges. Whether it was a vault or a dungeon, he couldn't yet tell, but something valuable lay beneath. Opening it slowly, he peered into the darkness below. A stone staircase wound deep into the earth, vanishing into the shadows. He murmured quietly, noting how deep it seemed. After a quick check to ensure there were no traps or signs of recent passage, he made his decision. Gripping a lantern he had looted days prior, Seowoon descended into the passage. Its glow pushed back the darkness, casting long shadows along the stone walls. The silence was absolute. At the base of the stairs, he reached out and hooked the lantern securely onto the wall, ready to enjoy whatever waited below. The gentle flicker of light illuminated the space ahead, revealing metal hooks, interlocking rings, and strange, unfamiliar tools, each arranged in precise order. After surveying the entire room, Seowoon came to a conclusion. It was a food storage warehouse. The realization sparked a subtle relief. In the end, it was exactly as he suspected. Only food. But in a world as unstable as this, that wasn't a bad outcome. If the space contained only provisions, it likely meant it had gone undisturbed. Roughly an hour later, Seowoon lay sprawled on the warehouse floor, fully fed. His limbs were stretched lazily across the ground, and his expression carried the peace of a man who had not eaten well in days. Still resting on the ground, he let his thoughts wander. A bit of white rice would have made it perfect, but beggars couldn't afford to be choosers. With a relaxed tone, he considered the timing. Perhaps now was finally the right moment to use the elixir. Opening his subspace, he retrieved the glowing martial arts manual as well. The object pulsed faintly in his hand, and a system message appeared before him. Book of the Unbreakable Fist. The system continued with a strange story. Mage, it said, had devoted his entire life to developing an unbeatable technique. After countless battles, his final record stood at 1,429 wins and 1,429 losses. The technique that consumed his entire life's effort left no legacy, no disciples. His martial art died, largely mocked and dismissed. As flashes of chaotic, frantic fistfights swirled in Seowoon's mind, he stared at the glowing manual. The absurdity of it left him momentarily stunned. Out of all the manuals in the world, this had to be the one he stumbled upon? Still, after a long pause, he opened the book. The light from its pages filled the room, washing across the stone walls in gentle waves. Ultimately, he chose to learn it. Even if he wasn't ready to practice the technique immediately, he decided he would use the elixir first. He stared at it in silence, trying to determine if using it was as simple as just drinking it. The circle stone had hurt like hell. If this was similar, it might come with just as much agony. But strength was all that mattered now, and hesitation had no place here. With determination locked in his eyes, he raised the elixir and drank it in one long gulp. The effects were instantaneous. His eyes shot wide open, his body jolting upright as a violent surge erupted inside him. Brilliant blue mana erupted from his lower abdomen, pulsing like a living force. It coiled and expanded with breathtaking intensity. Compared to what he had absorbed earlier, this was a world apart. The mana now coursing through him was richer, heavier, and far more powerful. And then the side effects began. His body reacted with violence. Muscles clenched, limbs grew stiff. Moving became impossible. The force overwhelmed every nerve in his body. He collapsed backward, fully paralyzed. The 3-hour wait began. 3 grueling hours passed. Sweat drenched his entire body. Every breath came slow and ragged. His hands trembled faintly as he reached up to grasp at his coat. His head tilted back, voice low and slurred with fatigue. Staying motionless for so long had been its own form of torture. His limbs felt heavy. Every joint ached. Lying there, he reflected on everything that had happened over the past week, most of it spent in hiding. And just today, he had avoided both the great Mage and Nam Sagwan. The mere fact that he had survived felt miraculous. Finally, the exhaustion became too much. Curled on the floor, he allowed his body to rest. Sleep claimed him almost immediately, pulling him into a dreamless state. The warehouse fell silent, disturbed only by the slow rhythm of his breath. Morning arrived. A chime rang sharply through the stillness, signaling a system message. A glowing screen materialized before him. Day 13 of the Cloyd Survival event. The heavy door to the warehouse creaked open with sudden force, pushing aside debris as light poured into the chamber. Seowoon stepped out into the morning air, adjusting his cloak. The sun rose above the treetops, casting a clear light over the forest floor. He wasn't surprised to find himself inside the restricted zone. Still weary, he called upon the system to show survivor list. The system responded instantly. A glowing screen blinked into existence. Names appeared in sequence. Seowoon scanned them, then paused. His eyes widened. One name had vanished from the list. Someone had been eliminated during the night, and he hadn't heard a thing. The realization struck hard. Seowoon stared at the glowing system screen, eyes wide in disbelief. The name listed as eliminated during the night left him frozen. Jang Dokyeon. The elder had died. His mind struggled to comprehend how someone like that could have met such an end. A question formed almost instinctively. Perhaps, thinking there was no imminent threat, the old man had attempted something absurd, an extreme training method, maybe one that went too far. His gaze swept across the shrinking map. Tension bled into his posture. The zone was closing in fast. Remaining in the top 10 meant avoiding elimination at all costs. Without hesitation, he walked forward, leaves scattering in his wake as he cut through the forest. His path was clear: survive, avoid combat, and hold position. For someone as comparatively weak as him, evasion and caution were the only means of survival. With his crossbow secured, Seowoon moved swiftly, eyes sharp, body tense. He knew his strengths lay not in power, but in foresight and endurance. If he wanted to climb the ranks, he needed to stay hidden, stay quiet, and stay out of fights. Then something shifted. His senses flared. His eyes snapped open wide as the entire world ahead of him erupted into light and heat. A massive explosion detonated just a few steps away, engulfing the path in a tidal wave of flame. The force was overwhelming. Instinct saved him. He dove to the side, landing hard, body scraping against the dirt. Shock still echoed through his chest as he struggled to sit up. His breath came in ragged bursts. He had nearly been incinerated. There was no mistaking it. The scale, the heat, the devastation. Only one person could have cast a spell like that. A name surfaced in his mind, and his breath caught. It could only be one person. Through the smoke and scorched air, a lone figure emerged from the epicenter of the blast. As the flames died down, the extent of the destruction became clear. The damage was monumental. Standing amidst the aftermath, framed by embers and ash, was a single figure. Escrow. The great mage stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he scanned the clearing. Something had tripped his item detection. At first, he had assumed it might be Nam Sagwan, but this was someone else entirely. Seowoon gritted his teeth, frustration twisting across his face. He had allowed himself to get distracted, caught up in the exhilaration of his recently awakened inner energy, and had completely ignored his surroundings. Escrow addressed him calmly. He asked if Seowoon had any idea where Nam Sagwan might be. Seowoon said nothing. Neither of them knew. Behind a nearby tree, perfectly still, someone was listening. Nam Sagwan remained hidden, just out of view. Escrow's voice sharpened. With deliberate calm, he raised his staff. If the stranger before him knew nothing, then he had no use. The two's interaction amused the veiled figure, making his grin widened in the shadows. Escrow vowed to release Seowoon only if he revealed the exact location of Nam Sagwan. Still, Escrow planned to kill him regardless of the answer. Letting Seowoon go would only become a nuisance later, and Escrow knew he couldn't afford that risk. Seowoon responded sharply, pointing out that they had just met and questioning what Escrow was implying. He was genuinely confused, insisting he had no idea where Nam Sagwan could be hiding. Escrow narrowed his eyes and said that Seowoon and Nam Sagwan seemed to come from a similar region. He mused grimly that if Seowoon truly didn't know where Sagwan was, then he would have no choice but to kill him on the spot. At that very moment, Seowoon caught sight of something rapidly tearing through the air, coming from behind the mage. Within seconds, the object slammed against Escrow's mana barrier with a deafening explosion, shaking the air around them. Only after the violent impact did Escrow realize Sagwan had been hiding nearby, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sagwan spoke aloud confidently, announcing that he had fully recovered from his injuries. He also noted with a smirk that Escrow didn't seem to lack any mana either. Seowoon could only curse silently in his mind, bewildered about where Sagwan had appeared from out of nowhere. Sagwan's excitement was evident as his fist began to glow with a raw, powerful energy. He prepared to land another devastating punch, determined to finish the mage once and for all. Escrow wasn't like the others he had faced before. He raised his staff defensively and put up a fight, but his mana barrier shattered in an instant under Sagwan's strike. Yet, Escrow scoffed arrogantly, questioning how such a simple attack could possibly harm someone like him. Then blood started to spill. Sagwan was a skilled martial artist, and his speed far surpassed that of the mage. He spoke aloud, asking if Escrow had ever heard of enhanced energy, a rare martial art underarm energy that few had ever mastered. Sagwan went on to say that Escrow was the first person he had ever demonstrated this technique to in battle, telling him to consider himself honored. Without any resistance, Sagwan's arm passed through Escrow's neck. As he pulled back, blood sprayed freely while the mage screamed in pain without restraint. Escrow clutched his bloodied neck desperately, struggling to hold on as Sagwan declared that he wouldn't be chanting annoying spells anymore with a hole in his neck. Sagwan remarked that it was expected for someone like Escrow, the Archmage, to make it into the top 5 fighters. Still, meeting Sagwan would become his greatest regret. Meanwhile, during the entire exchange, Seowoon had hidden himself using the night cloak. He felt fortunate that Sagwan had arrived when he did. While the two were distracted in their fight, Seowoon planned to escape quickly, though he was surprised to witness how brutal the battle's end would be. Sagwan relentlessly stabbed Escrow with enhanced energy, piercing flesh and bone without any resistance. Blood sprayed everywhere with each blow. His movements showed no hesitation, the hardened precision of a martial artist who had survived the toughest times in the martial world. As Seowoon watched the supposedly invincible Archmage get utterly destroyed by Sagwan, he felt neither fear for Sagwan nor pity for Escrow. Instead, one thought rose above all others. He swallowed nervously, wondering if he could absorb their life energy, how powerful he might become. Throughout the massacre, Escrow endured far longer than anyone expected given his injuries and condition. Using voice transmission, Escrow revealed that the person Sagwan had killed, Elizabeth, was his most beloved apprentice. Sagwan scoffed dismissively, brushing the blood off his hand as he noted that Escrow was speaking inside his head. Escrow continued, explaining that when she was kicked out of the academy, she was not recognized by the academic society simply because she was a woman. He expressed regret that he had not stopped her at that crucial time. Sagwan scoffed again, saying that if she truly was a woman, there was no way he wouldn't have noticed it. He suggested she might have looked no different from a man, dismissing the claim with a harsh tone. A sinister smile slowly spread across Escrow's bloodied and battered lips as he declared that now he could finally silence Sagwan's filthy mouth for good. Sagwan remained completely unaware of the mage's true intentions. Nearby, Seowoon caught sight of something shifting behind the thick clouds. Suddenly, the entire area lit up with an eerie glow, and Seowoon could only wonder what mysterious force was hidden behind those glowing clouds above. As if the sun itself were slowly descending, the clouds covering the area began to brighten ominously. The moment the meteor broke through the cloud line, a massive fiery object plunged through the air with terrifying speed. The mage had summoned something capable of devastating the entire area in the blink of an eye. Escrow stood completely emotionless, having already cast his spell. All that remained was to watch it burn the man who had killed his beloved disciple. Sagwan cursed bitterly under his breath, questioning how Escrow could be casting a spell in such a weakened and battered state, noting with disbelief that he couldn't even properly chant anymore. Through voice transmission, Escrow's cold voice rang out, declaring it to be the ultimate spell only an Archmage could cast. Armageddon, paid for with both mana and life energy. The searing heat quickly became unbearable, and Sagwan darted away, desperately trying to escape the impact zone while hurling furious curses at Escrow, calling him an insane bastard. Seowoon was already on his feet, scrambling to flee as well, regretting his choice to watch instead of running earlier. At the moment of impact, Escrow expressed softly how nice it would be to see Elizabeth again. His form began to disintegrate, his final wish to see her one last time. Once his form fully vanished, only a wooden box remained where he had stood, marking the moment Escrow was sent back to the lobby. The meteor collided violently with the ground, causing a massive explosion and fire that radiated outward without any restraint. From a distance, another elf watched the devastating spell descend into the earth, musing thoughtfully that whoever wielded such power must be someone he was very familiar with. After the impact, Seowoon lay bloodied and barely clinging to life. He cursed himself bitterly, thinking that if he had fled earlier, he might have escaped unscathed. His greed for the mage's life energy had cost him dearly. With his remaining strength, he reached into his subspace inventory and pulled out a healing scroll. He was determined not to die a meaningless death in this place. Using his mouth, he carefully tore open several healing scrolls. Thanks to his meticulous looting, he had plenty of these. Otherwise, he would have surely bled out and died. Afterward, he crawled away from the devastation, barely making it out alive. The elixir he had consumed earlier helped him hold on and escape the center of the impact zone. Still, he cursed silently at the lingering pain that refused to fade, even after healing himself. Breaking a few more healing scrolls, Seowoon finally managed to stand and breathe more easily. Looking around, he realized he had burned through nearly all his saved healing scrolls and would now need to farm more. He opened the player count window, and, with a soft chime, the notification appeared. It informed him that Escrow had died at Sagwan's hands. Seowoon felt a deep pang of regret that he had failed to steal the mage's life energy, seemingly forgetting how close he had come to death moments earlier. Something else caught his attention. The notification that Sagwan had died was nowhere to be found, suggesting the martial artist was still alive. Then Seowoon heard it, a desperate cry for help. With a rustle of foliage, Seowoon cautiously moved toward the direction for which the faint, desperate cry for help echoed. Each step brought the sound into sharper focus, growing louder and more urgent. The moment Seowoon brushed aside the thick leaves, he finally saw the scene before him. Sagwan lay barely alive on the ground, his limbs severed and mangled, his blood soaking the earth in a vivid crimson. Despite his pain, he struggled to tear open a healing scroll clenched between his teeth. Just one scroll was enough to help restore the circulation of his life energy. Realization dawned on Seowoon. Of course, it would have been nearly impossible to dodge a meteor aimed directly at him. Now, with both arms useless, Sagwan was powerless to open the healing scroll himself. Sagwan cried out, his voice weak but determined, that he couldn't die like this. Calling out feebly to Seowoon, he pleaded for help in tearing open the healing scroll. Seowoon simply asked whether he was truly Nam Sagwan. The martial artist jolted in surprise that someone had recognized him. Seowoon continued, saying he had always wondered what kind of gear Sagwan used to become so strong every time his name appeared in the kill log. He had believed Sagwan would dominate the entire game, and to see him in such a broken state was almost unbelievable. Sagwan, too weak even to bite through the healing scroll, promised that if Seowoon helped him heal, he would make Seowoon the winner. He added that helping Seowoon win would be nothing compared to the cost of killing him, which would leave Seowoon with nothing. Seowoon pulled a gleaming sword from his subspace inventory. Unaware that Seowoon practiced secret martial arts unknown to anyone else in this world, Sagwan did not realize the danger he faced. Seowoon believed that by acquiring Sagwan's items and life energy, he could aim for the top ranks. With a confident smile, he raised his sword high, envisioning all the possibilities. Sagwan pleaded once more, warning that if Seowoon killed him, he wouldn't be able to handle the other powerful players waiting in the wings. He explained that he possessed few items, and his martial arts skills were not learned in this world. Seowoon mused that at least he should know the man he was about to kill, introducing himself as Jin Seowoon. Sagwan screamed in desperation, accepting that this might be his final moment, but he vowed never to forget what Seowoon had done for him. Without hesitation, Seowoon drove his sword towards Sagwan's brain. The scream abruptly ceased, and silence descended upon the battleground. That was how Seowoon, a man who had barely matched such a martial artist, managed to steal such a formidable figure. Seowoon cursed the strange circumstances, feeling guilty because Sagwan's appearance was almost childlike. Then he felt it. The life energy that had belonged to Sagwan surged powerfully toward him. The martial art bestowed by an elder allowed Seowoon to sense and absorb his enemy's life energy. As he absorbed it, he mused aloud at the immense amount rushing into his body. Seowoon smiled, thinking that Sagwan was practically a human elixir. Killing him had flooded Seowoon's dantian with an overwhelming surge of internal energy. At that moment, the rest of the players received the notification. The expert at hiding, the distant warrior, the hero from a fantasy world, and the elf archer on their adventure all saw that Nam Sagwan had been slain by Jin Seawoon, leaving only 8 players remaining on the battleground. Perched on a massive tree branch, the elf mused aloud that with the tiger slain, the foxes would now run rampant. Seowoon couldn't help but to stood in awe of the immense strength coursing through him. The internal energy he had absorbed from Nam Sagwan was nothing short of extraordinary. With such power at his disposal, he felt invincible, confident he could now stand his ground against any adversary. He then shifted his attention to the wooden box that had appeared where Nam Sagwan's body had vanished. As he opened it, he reflected on Nam Sagwan's formidable strength. Surely, someone of that caliber wouldn't have wasted time farming for regular loot. A hint of disappointment lingered in his thoughts, anticipating an empty chest. However, his breath caught as he gazed upon the chest's contents. Inside were several rings, once worn by Nam Sagwan. One after another, Seowoon slid them onto his fingers, feeling his power surge with each new piece. The rings, rare-class items, offered significant boosts: agility, strength, stamina, and magic resistance, with two identical ones enhancing the latter substantially. Sensing the immense stat gains, Seowoon reflected on Nam Sagwan's hypocrisy, recalling the martial artist's disdain for relying on gear despite his possession of such powerful items. After equipping the rings, Seowoon checked his character window. His status as both martial artist and mage was already formidable, but now, bolstered by his new equipment, his attributes had become monstrous. A burst of joy lit up his face as he celebrated his new strength, confident that victory in the game was within reach. Alongside the rings, he also possessed the elusive Knight Cloak, a garment so rare that few could detect its wearer. Among the spoils were several martial arts manuals, though they remained inaccessible due to their requirement for a specific internal cultivation technique. As he contemplated this, Seowoon sensed an approaching presence from behind. This time, rather than retreating or hiding, he remained where he stood, ready to test his newfound might. As he turned, he heard the chant of a spell from an approaching member of the Escrow Magic Corporation. Rather than evading, Seowoon braced himself, allowing the fire strike spell to hit him directly. Smoke curled around his figure as the mage emerged, voicing disbelief at Seowoon's apparent carelessness. The mage speculated aloud that Seowoon's previous victory over Nam Sagwan must have been pure luck, but Seowoon, unfazed, asked him to repeat his insult. The question startled the mage, who could not understand how Seowoon had survived the fire spell. Thanks to the dual magic resistance rings, which granted him a total of 90 points of resistance, the damage had been negligible. With a smirk, Seowoon dismissed the spell as nothing more than a harmless flash. He then began walking toward the mage. The sight of his approach sent the caster into a panic, demanding he stop and accusing him of trickery. The mage raised his staff, threatening a more powerful spell if Seowoon advanced any further. Seowoon continued being unfazed, knowing full well that only Escrow himself might pose a threat, and even then, at the cost of his own life. That battle had already concluded. Confidently, Seowoon surmised that no spell from this mage could truly harm him now. The mage unleashed his spell. A fiery explosion burst forth, striking Seowoon directly in the chest. But once again, he remained unharmed, his magic resistance absorbing most of the damage. In response, Seowoon drew back his arm, forming a solid fist. With calm determination, he invoked the martial technique he intended to use, Peerless Fist Technique, Straight Severing Move. Seowoon's fist connected directly with the mage's chest, and a massive surge of internal energy exploded at the point of contact. The result was immediate and devastating. The mage's chest collapsed inward, his body violently thrown back as he coughed up blood, the sheer force of the strike launching him into a nearby tree with a sickening thud. Even Seowoon himself was taken aback by the overwhelming effect of the blow. He hadn't expected the technique, introduced as dismissed as weak and ineffective, to yield such a result. He reasoned that its surprising strength stemmed not from the skill itself, but from the considerable volume of internal energy he had absorbed. In addition to the rare class rings now adorning his fingers, each boosting his stats dramatically, he had become a combatant of an entirely new caliber. The mage's health dropped to 0, and his form dissolved into radiant particles of light. A familiar notification sounded, indicating only 7 players remained in the match. The mage, Jahark, had been eliminated by a single martial technique. A wooden loot box appeared, along with a residue of vital energy. Seowoon wasted no time. He absorbed the vital energy and opened the box, confirming what he suspected. His magic resistance was so high that earlier spells had barely scratched him. With his resistances, agility, and stamina drastically enhanced, he was more prepared than ever for what lay ahead. He threw his night cloak back on, fading into the darkness like a shadow. He considered that with Nam Sagwan eliminated, those who had stayed hidden would now begin to show themselves. But he was not the only one aware of this shift. Others would surely act, and tonight's battles would be long and brutal. Moving swiftly, he climbed into the treetops, just as the elder who had taught him martial arts once had. His steps were light, deliberate, each movement a quiet tribute to the man who had given him the tools to survive. As he traversed the canopy, a soft smile touched his lips. A silent promise passed through his mind as he offered his gratitude to the elder, which was to win this round, no matter what. An hour later, the atmosphere within the safe zone was calm, though it held the tension of an impending storm. Seowoon perched himself atop the tallest tree, completely cloaked, his eyes scanning the dark forest below. He had become a prime target by taking out one of the strongest players. His position was now not just one of strength, but also danger. Down below, Stanko, an enraged warrior and ally of Jahark, shouted furiously into the night. His voice echoed through the woods, demanding Seowoon reveal himself and face him in open combat. He hurled slurs and curses at every player he assumed was hiding. Seowoon remained perfectly still, clinging to the tree trunk with calm demeanor. He found the noise grating, internally remarking how loud someone could be in the dead of night. Stanko stood on a clearing, sword resting on his shoulder. He called out again, branding his unseen opponents as cowards. He dared them to fight, claiming that he alone was unafraid. Suddenly, a flash streaked through the darkness, a projectile moving at incredible speed. As it entered his awareness, Stanko instinctively raised his blade. The arrow struck with a brilliant crash, a loud ringing like shattered crystal filling the air. The aura-charged arrow, brimming with lightning, had been blocked just in time. He roared again, now in fury rather than pride, cursing the hidden attacker for cowardice and demanding a fair duel. It was a foolish demand, of course. No archer would willingly face a warrior in close quarters. Meanwhile, Seowoon remained hidden, quietly wondering who had launched the attack. Moments later, Stanko muttered a name, Juro Kwana. The tone in his voice had changed, no longer mocking, but filled with reluctant admiration. Up above, his gaze found its mark. An elf with a bow stood on a branch, poised with another arrow nocked. Juro Kwana looked down with an expression of calm resolve. He asked Stanko if he recognized him. Stanko replied that he did, noting that even fools in the mercenary world knew of the divine archer's exploits. The legend of Juro Kwana had long been etched into the lore of the land. Stanko proposed a temporary alliance, reasoning that the archer likely intended to win the competition. He suggested they work together to eliminate Seowoon first. Juro Kwana responded with a thoughtful hum, his interest apparently piqued by the offer, though his expression remained unreadable beneath the moonlit canopy. With effortless grace, the archer descended from the tree. His landing was so light that it gave the illusion of magical support, as if gravity itself bent to his will. Pleased with the apparent success of his ruse, Stanko praised Juro Kwana's judgment. He introduced himself as a seasoned mercenary affiliated with a prominent adventurer guild, one whose exploits had earned some fame among lower-ranking fighters. With confidence, he asserted that his name carried weight and assured the archer that their collaboration would not be regretted. Juro Kwana stood motionless, offering a slight word of affirmation as the only sign of his agreement. A smirk spread across Stanko's face as he indulged in the belief that the famed divine archer had been easily manipulated. He inwardly scoffed at the archer's naivety, convinced that Juro Kwana was merely another gullible fighter drawn in by promises of tactical advantage. It was to him almost too easy, yet Juro Kwana's focus lay elsewhere. He was in the midst of executing a timed maneuver that had nothing to do with trust or conversation. As he counted silently on his fingers, he realized that his estimation had been off by a few seconds. Raising his head to reassess, he saw Stanko's sword already in motion, aimed directly at him. Stanko charged forward with absolute certainty, convinced that close-range combat played to his advantage. He scoffed internally at the archer's supposed miscalculation. The proposal of alliance had been mere bait to lure his target into a vulnerable position. With a burst of energy and a sharp breath, he swung his blade and shouted internally for Juro Kwana to fall and relinquish his items. Juro Kwana remained completely composed. His stance held firm, and he did not flinch or attempt to retreat. He appeared to embrace death, but beneath that stillness was a plan already set into motion. Before the encounter, Juro Kwana had fired an arrow into the distance, calibrated to return precisely to this location. Just as Stanko believed victory was his, the arrow struck him directly in the head from behind. Blood erupted violently as his skull gave way to the force of the projectile. The execution was calculated, brutal, and efficient. Stanko's body dissolved into glowing particles of light, leaving behind a loot chest where he had fallen. Juro Kwana turned away without a word, his only thought lingering on the absurdity of ever cooperating with someone as base and unrefined as Stanko. From high above the trees, veiled by the power of the night cloak, Seawoon descended. Juro Kwana remained unaware of his presence, even as he muttered under his breath about the time lost dealing with the mercenary. He resumed his search with renewed focus, determined to locate Seawoon before the others made their moves. With only 7 players left in the competition, Seawoon understood that every bit of vital energy counted. The power he could claim from fallen enemies would determine his advantage in the increasingly brutal fights to come. He extended his hand and began to absorb the vital essence that lingered from Stanko's demise. Despite his desire to hasten the process, it moved at its own methodical pace. Meanwhile, Juro Kwana briefly turned his head, sensing a shift in the air behind him. His eyes scanned the area cautiously, but settled only on the loot box. The night cloak held its promise of invisibility, and Seawoon remained undetected. But for a brief moment, Seawoon's confidence wavered. He had trusted in the cloak's ability to obscure him from even magical detection. That Juro Kwana might possess an unspoken sensory skill unsettled him. He chastised himself inwardly for possibly being careless in such a critical moment. Juro Kwana muttered a final dismissal, concluding that Stanko's possessions were not worth the effort or the risk. He turned and walked away, leaving the loot untouched in the dirt beneath his feet. Seawoon completed the energy absorption just as the archer vanished from sight. The encounter left him wary and intrigued. Juro Kwana's perceptiveness was unexpected, and Seawoon made a mental note never to underestimate the divine archer again. He filed away the archer's name as the next true obstacle in the path to claiming victory, knowing the challenge ahead would be nothing short of monumental.